Josh, good morning to you. Are you jealous of Marty Smith's hair?
Look, I'm going to do something called deflecting, and I'm going to do something called swerving, okay?
Okay.
Love Marty to death. I don't want to talk about any of that. I want to take you back to 2005.
Ooh.
The year was '05. The city was Jacksonville, Florida. The game was Super Bowl, 30, whatever. It was Eagles, and it was Patriots. And the entire lead-up was about Terrell Owens being injured, and could he make it back in time? And he plays, and he shines.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point in my life, that was the most incredible injury recovery I had ever seen. But the fact that a certain someone, after throwing their back out just seemingly hours ago, is on the live mic today.
Thank you.
Forget about that. Terrell Owens is to this show now what Marty is to me. I said it.
Thank you. Hey, look, I think I deserve those kudos. My wife asked me if I was going to be able to make it on the air today. I said, look, it's very strenuous to sit in a chair with my fat ass and talk sports for 3 hours, but I think I can fight through in battle. Have you ever had a bad, embarrassing injury like that?
What is your most washed injury, Josh? Because you're in pretty good shape. What's the moment you went, crap, I'm getting old?
It had nothing to do with age, because I don't believe that age is a real thing. But in the softball playoffs last year, so you know it's big, I got a blister on the bottom of my foot. And the thing about blisters is they should really be called a more violent name, just like turf toe, because they can completely debilitate you. You can't do anything. If you got a blister on the bottom of your foot, you can't do anything. And it's the playoffs, and I wrapped my foot in a bunch of athletic tape, very unprofessionally, might I add. And I went as best I could. Fortunately, we got rained out after the second inning, so no one remembers it. There's no footage of it, but I know how it is. Blisters, debilitating back injuries, total apples-to-apples comparison.
Well, I was really hoping for like a ping-pong cut on the eye with management and a brutal matchup and like the paddle hit you accidentally. I was hoping for something, but a blister's pretty good on the bottom of the foot. Oregon is also playing hurt right now with their offensive
They got a
line.
blister and a back issue right now. I think both.
I think that was a pretty good transition, actually. That was pretty solid by me. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not playing hurt, but I'm here to play.
Yeah.
You kicked off your podcast. I listen to every episode, but you kick it off, and the second observation is you're not out on Oregon as a national championship contending team. It's a different vibe out west right now. There's a little bit of panic going on. We know they're playing hurt on the offensive line. Could you walk us through looking at Oregon and saying they can still do it?
So every year we see examples, because we don't have a preseason in college football, of teams that start slow. They're not close to matching the hype or expectation around them. And then in week 5 or 6 or whatever, something weird happens, and they hit their stride. It's like they were searching for the gas pedal. They finally find the gas pedal, and they're off to the races. And we find ourselves with them in the thick of the playoff race, and we're looking back saying, wow, this doesn't even seem like the same team as we saw in week 1 and week 2. Now, just because you struggle in week 1 and week 2 is no guarantee you're going to become that, but we will inevitably see examples of that this year. So what I was saying the other night is, if I thought highly of Oregon, if I thought they're a top 5 team, which I did, and I thought I had a good read on the skill level on the roster, which I think I do, I am not punting on them after 2 inferior weeks. I will if they're stacking 4 or 5 of them on top of each other, and I have bumped them down. I've graded them down a little bit, but that is still a team with excellent skill play. That is still a team with a really good quarterback. That's still a team that has stacked line of scrimmage talent very, very effectively. Has it played to its potential, especially on offensive line? No, it has not. They've also been injured there. I'm just interested to see, once they settle into a starting 5, what they look like. But it's just, there is an example every year of some team that it turns out needed a longer runway to get going. And because their schedule is not front-loaded, they can afford to look bad early in the season. Now, LSU couldn't afford to do that. They played USC in week 1. Michigan couldn't afford to do that. They just got splattered by Texas. And so sometimes these teams are never going to become what we thought they would. Sometimes they will, but they need more time. I just think Oregon needs a little more time.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, too, on the schedule the next couple of weeks. They got Oregon State this week, then a bye, then UCLA, then Michigan State before that big Ohio State game. So it's kind of a survive and advance mode the next month. Josh Pate is our guest, at Josh Pate CFB on Twitter. Go give him a follow. His show every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, live on YouTube, 5 o'clock our time. And you can check the podcast as well wherever you find your podcasts. And then, looking at the other games this weekend, I think one of the silver linings that I at least had as an Oregon fan was they've come close, but they are at least 2-0. And then you look what happened in South Bend, Indiana, and you think, dear God, a week ago, we're talking about Notre Dame and their defense, and look how good they look. And you just come out and lay an absolute egg, man. It's so hard because we want to be hot takey and reactionary. Is there a takeaway there for Marcus Freeman now that this is becoming a trend that we've seen, 14-point spread, 16-point spread, 28-point spread, losing as a massive favorite at home to inferior talent?
Yeah, I think it's just a reflection that your program still has a little bit too much human nature about it. The entire pride point of, elite programs, Saban's Alabama, Kirby's Georgia, is they don't play to a competition level. They just play to a standard. And the thing about it is that's easy to say. I just said that in 3 seconds. But it's very, very hard. It takes multiple years to implement that kind of ideology and mentality in anybody, much less 18 to 22-year-olds. So very simply, they haven't been able to accomplish that there. This is now multiple times as a double-digit favorite he's lost. Multiple times to unranked opponents at home he's lost. And like you said, it's not that they haven't gotten big wins. They played Ohio State down to the wire last year at home, too. So it's not like they haven't been really competitive with the best in the country. But at the same time, they've lost to teams that are just inexplicable to lose to. So after the game, Freeman said, "We've been here before." And that's a problem that he said that because it's true. They have been there before. I think that was a comfort phrase, but it's not good. And so what I always wonder in these situations is even though they don't owe me an answer, I wonder if they have answers. Head coaches are not paid to ask questions. They are paid to have answers. We can ask them, but they're supposed to answer them. And so when these kind of losses happen, I wonder how quickly internally they have an answer as to why. Because if they're sitting there scratching their head and it's a back to the drawing board mentality, well, you're sunk at that point. Like your season's done. Because if you're searching and you're back to a drawing board in week 3, when the competition around you inevitably has figured it out and they're putting their pedal all the way to the ground and you're trying to figure things out, that's a recipe for disaster, especially when you don't have explosivity on your offense. See, that's the difference. That's one of the differences in Oregon versus Notre Dame. When Oregon figures it out, and up until they figure it out, they can still score with explosive plays and bail themselves out. Notre Dame can't do that. Notre Dame got outgained by 100 yards by Northern Illinois at home. That is not what Idaho and Boise necessarily were able to do to Oregon. So I don't know, man. I think they can still, just the same as Oregon, I think Notre Dame can still have a really good season. They're limited. Their capacity is limited because, like I said, they don't have the difference makers offensively. But the bigger picture is they got to hold on to Deuce Knight. That is a 5-star quarterback committed to him, and he's been committed for a while. He's from Mississippi. He's a phenomenal player. All the Southern schools are after him. And it's a big, big focal point in the recruiting industry right now. Will he stick? Because if he sticks, that is the caliber of player that Notre Dame hasn't had in a long time and that Marcus Freeman hasn't had there. And so that's the two-part battle they're fighting right now.
Josh, I would label you a college football traditionalist. You have evolved with the sport in different ways, but you've also, you've given takes on this show about your feelings on expanded playoff talk and how many teams should be in the party and kind of what the sport and its history have been. And I know it's been really weird times talking about this realignment stuff and what teams are in and what teams are out. We got a weird weekend. We have a civil war up here in Oregon between Oregon State and Oregon, and we've got the Apple Cup in Seattle between the Cougars and the Huskies. And I don't know how much of your time, because you're traveling, you're watching as many games as you can, you've watched of the Beavs and the Cougs, but these are rivalry games to a lot of people. And it's a weird feeling because they're in week 3. They're not at the end of the year. And so just how people, college football fans, should feel with this new world of rivalry weekend for us locally being the 3rd week of the season when I'm watching videos with people's breath coming out of their helmets at the end of the season traditionally, how you sit with all of that.
Well, the way I sit with it is I hate it. The way each individual fan sits with it is determined by what they value the most. If you value the playoff the most, then it's a non-issue to you because you're not paying attention to it anyway. But if you value Saturdays in the fall and tradition more, like I do, that's what I hold the closest to me, and the playoffs on the periphery, then this sucks. Because you guys know as well as I do, if you leave your backyard up there, if you go to Topeka, Kansas, or Amarillo, Texas, or Columbus, Georgia, they're not even paying attention to those games this weekend. And they almost feel like they are games that they reluctantly found room for on the schedule as opposed to prioritizing on the schedule. Now, I'll give them credit. At least they're playing the games. Oklahoma doesn't even play Oklahoma State anymore, so at least they're playing the games. But I don't like it. Yet, inevitably, when you say stuff like that, you're going to have folks come at you and say, oh, you just need to get with the times. Well, you're just fighting change. Well, I don't fight all the change. I just fight the change that I think is not good. Not all change is progress necessarily. So I don't think that it was ever necessary to tear the sport down like this. I look at that stat I put out the other day, Pac-12 teams, 21-2 so far this year, and I just think to myself, this thing got totally blown up, and it never had to get blown up. They just did it because they could.
Yeah, it's been a last year too, going through the year that we had with a couple of teams in playoff contention. Washington reaching the national title. It's like, hey, we finally figured it out as a conference, right in time for all of us to crumble around us. The whole new Saturday tour is going to Columbia, South Carolina this weekend. I asked you, Josh Pate, are you going to the right Columbia this weekend?
Oh,
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
All right, listen, I am going to tell you something that I'm using as an affirmation in my own mind. Missouri is going to beat Boston College by double digits.
Ooh.
And I'm telling myself that for the same reason I'm telling myself Bama is going to beat Wisconsin by double digits, because I don't want to be the one regretting not being at the right spot. Because last week I did it. I went to the Michigan-Texas game, and that's over at halftime. Meanwhile, and you know how much this pains me given my fandom, I'm watching Iowa State go walk-off field goal against Iowa. And I'm watching, that Oklahoma State-Arkansas game back and forth, just crazy. And meanwhile, I'm up there yawning on the field in the third quarter in the big house. So I can't have that happen again. So I got to go and see a close game. I've seen 2 blowout games so far this year, and that is not me. That is not what I pride myself on. So I got to have South Carolina mount up, and we got an 80% chance of thunderstorms at that game, by the way. So it could be a gross afternoon down in the South.
Now that you brought that up, I'm curious to ask you, Alabama, little sluggish. I don't know what's in the water with South Florida, but that's just like a bad matchup for them now. Back-to-back years, a little strange. Wisconsin, though, has not looked great. Anything there on that game? Are you intrigued? Is there Tyler Van Dyke? I know you mentioned you think it's probably going to be a blowout. I think most people would imagine that as well. Just curious your thoughts on that matchup in an Alabama team that's coming off a not great performance.
There's something so weird about that. Last year, Bama wins the SEC. They are an overtime in the playoff away from a national title game, and South Florida gave them fits. And this year, they gave them fits again. There is something about the pass rush and the way South Florida does things. It just messes with Alabama. Bama had a top 10 draft pick at left tackle last year, and he got put in a blender against South Florida. So I think Bama should be able to run pretty much at will against Wisconsin. I'm going to say this quietly because it sounds offensive, but Bama faced better athletes last week than they'll face this week against Wisconsin.
Wow.
There is no playmaker. There's no difference maker at wide receiver.
Yeah.
And conversely, Wisconsin, not great at stopping the run, and they will have to dedicate added men to the box. And Bama's the best in the country at busting you over the top. They don't have a good intermediate pass game, but they can nail you over the top. And they're too fast probably for Wisconsin as well. Tyler Van Dyke's got to have the game of his life, and Tyler Van Dyke trying too hard leads to multiple turnovers. We've seen that in his career. So I think Bama's going to win that game convincingly. But crazier things have happened because it was a dogfight with South Florida last week, as you said.
Yeah, I got my eye on Tulane as an upset special potentially at Oklahoma, given what Oklahoma looked like against what I don't think is a very good Houston team. Let me ask you.
Hey, Oklahoma's got Tennessee coming in there next week, so just keep that in mind.
Look ahead spot. Let me ask you real quick. College football is a weird sport for so many years, all of us. Well, I don't want to say anything bad about him. He's a college student, he's a kid. Now they're getting paid. So some people are just in on trashing these players, and I'm not saying you are because I haven't really heard you do it. I don't know if I've ever seen worse quarterback play in my life from any Division I school than that Vandegrift kid at Kentucky last weekend. He had 3 completions, a pick 6, and like 4 sacks. I don't know if I've ever seen worse quarterback play.
Well, you haven't seen worse quarterback play from a guy making $700,000 a year. Yeah. You probably haven't seen that. Yeah. So I agree with you. Now, I don't ever even hate on pro players. So I don't hate on college players. Like I've always just analyzed what I see. If you suck, you suck, but I'm not going to, tear you down as an individual. Most people, suffice it to say, do not buy into this philosophy. And I remember when we got to NIL, I remember saying, You guys claim you're fighting for players' rights, and that's great. I'm not even necessarily against it. But you need to understand this whole illusion of amateurism and the dynamic of treating college players with kid gloves, that's going out the window. Once people know these college kids are making more than they do at their job and they're 40 years old, they will start treating those kids like they are professional athletes, and it's going to be a problem because they are mentally not there, and physically many of them will never be there, and you're gonna have issues. Well, here's the issue. Yeah. And so now you're going to have some guys go in a tank mentally. I don't know that Vandergriff will be that. In fact, it doesn't matter, because if that's him at his best, then it doesn't really matter if he goes in a tank. That was also an example of a team knowing their head coach tried to leave them.
Yep.
Mark Stoops tried to get the A&M job. He had the A&M job. The fan base revolted. They turned away at the 11th hour, and it's like running away towards a door, and then the door's locked, and you got to turn back and you got to face the people you ran away from. And the funny thing that happens, a team doesn't tend to want to go over the cliff for you once they find out you tried to leave them. And there's a reason Kentucky, that's the worst you've seen them look in a long time. It's because it's not the same Kentucky team, because they gave up on their coach.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, they play Georgia this weekend, so, good,
Have fun. Have fun.
Good luck with that one. Josh Pate, at Josh Pate, CFB on Twitter. Go give him a follow every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Josh Pate's College Football Show live on YouTube. Check the podcast wherever you can. He's the best in the business, and I appreciate you respecting my bravery to be at work today and acknowledging my toughness, and we can't wait to chat with you again next Wednesday.
I know you're sitting so the rest of us can run. I appreciate it.
There you go, Josh Pate. Good stuff talking college football.
I was really
him.
curious where he was going with the Jacksonville.
I was too. I don't know
what.
Yeah,
and then he brought up T.O. and I went, "Oh no, he's going to do it."
Oh no, he's doing it.
And he did it.
And I'm not playing hungover like Donovan McNabb. I promise you. It's
You're
just
not puking in the
I'm
huddle?
not puking in the huddle. I'm just we're in a lot of pain today. What is your most washed injury? I hurt my back yesterday picking up my 7-month-old son, so we're playing injured today.